You are not who you think you are. Not really. You wear your name. You repeat your routines. You say what you've always said, love what you've always loved, avoid what you've always feared. But behind it all, beneath the adult voice and curated self-image, is someone else. Someone you haven't seen in a very long time. A child, invisible to the world but still living inside you. And here's the most unnerving part. That child is still making your decisions. The way you walk into a room and immediately scan for rejection, that wasn't a conscious choice. That's the child in you waiting for the next cold glance, the next withheld affection, the next unpredictable outburst. The way you stay silent in arguments, not because you're calm, but because you learned early that speaking up leads to punishment, abandonment, or worse. That's not wisdom, that's fear, conditioned into your bones before you even knew how to spell your name. And yet you still ask yourself, why am I like this? Why do you always attract people who make you feel small? Why does love feel like anxiety? Why does loneliness feel safer than intimacy? There's a reason, and it didn't begin in adulthood. It began in the quiet places where you were first shaped, not by logic or truth, but by survival. You weren't raised, you were programmed, not by evil parents or cruel teachers, necessarily, but by a system of expectations, punishments, dismissals, and subtle shamans that told you exactly who you were allowed to be and exactly what it would cost you to step out of line. And so you didn't. You complied. You adapted. You became who you needed to become in order to be loved, or at least tolerated. But adaptation has a price, and now you're paying it in the currency of your adult life, in the self-sabotage, in the addiction to being needed, in the inability to rest without guilt, in the voice in your head that never shuts up because once upon a time, silence meant danger. So, let's ask the real question. Who would you be today if your childhood hadn't taught you to betray yourself? Would you speak louder? Stand taller? Say no more freely? Love more openly? Choose differently? Would you still be in this relationship? Would you still chase their approval? Would you still silence your pain just to make peace? Or would you finally recognize that the life you're living is not yours? It's your childhood, still running the show. Only now, it's wearing grown-up clothes, and it calls itself you, but it's not. And somewhere inside, you know that. Here's what no one told you while you were growing up. You weren't just learning how to tie your shoes, write your name, or behave at the dinner table. You were being silently initiated into something far more powerful. A belief system about what it means to exist. You learned what was acceptable, what was too much, what got you praised, what got you punished, not just by your parents, but by tone, silence, omission, withdrawal. Childhood is where your nervous system is wired, but more than that, it's where your reality is wired. You formed beliefs about love, worth, and safety long before you had the language to question them. That's the hidden problem. You didn't grow up forming a self. You grew up forming a strategy. You became quiet because attention meant danger. You became loud because invisibility felt like death. You became funny, helpful, smart, obedient, not because you were choosing an identity, but because you were adapting. And now, as an adult, you call those adaptations personality. But what if they're not? What if your perfectionism is just the internalized voice of someone who only loved you when you succeeded? What if your independence is just unresolved abandonment in disguise? What if your resilience is just what you've called your trauma, dressed up in noble language because no one gave you space to collapse? Psychologist Alice Miller once said, "The child has no choice but to adapt, and the cost of adaptation is authenticity." This is the paradox you now face. You become functional, but are you free? You perform well in life, but does your soul breathe? You look calm on the outside, but do you feel safe inside your own mind? This is where Jung enters the picture. Carl Jung believed that the greatest burden a child can carry is the unlived life of the parent, and so many of us became what they could not be. We lived out the expectations they never voiced. We carried their shame, their fear, their trauma, as if it were our own. You became the peacemaker, because they didn't know how to handle conflict. You became the achiever, because they needed a child they could be proud of. You became the caretaker, because no one was taking care of them. But at what cost? You buried your rage. You censored your joy. You learned to fear your own depth. And now, when the world asks you who you are, you give it the resume version, the mask, the brand, the safe self. But underneath it all is still the child, still waiting for permission to exist without performing. This is not just psychology, it's existential philosophy. Because the fundamental question of childhood is not do they love me? It's can I be myself and still be safe? And if the answer was no, even subtly, even occasionally, you learned to split, to create a false self that could be loved, while hiding the true self that might not survive. That split becomes the architecture of your adult suffering. It's why you feel empty when you succeed, why you sabotage intimacy when it gets too real, why you never feel good enough even when you've done everything right, because you're still trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. You are not broken. You are burdened by a self that was created to survive, not to thrive. But survival is not the same as living. And now, you're starting to feel it. The ache, the inner tension, the spiritual claustrophobia of being too much for others, yet never enough for yourself. You're waking up to a truth that many avoid their entire lives, that your childhood wasn't just a phase, it was a blueprint, and unless you bring it into awareness, it will keep writing your story without your permission. You think your childhood is behind you, but it's not. It's in the way you flinch at kindness, because love always came with conditions. It's in the way you overthink every message you send, because one wrong word once cost you everything. It's in the way you fear joy, because you were taught that happiness is a setup for pain, a trap, a fleeting illusion, and so you sabotage it, not because you want to, but because your nervous system doesn't trust peace. This is how it lives in you, not in memories, but in reflexes, in the way you shut down when someone gets too close, in the way you overperform in relationships, in the way you say I'm fine when you're anything but. You don't remember all the details. You don't have to, because trauma doesn't live in memory. It lives in adaptation. It lives in your habits, in your relationships, in your choices. This is what people don't understand. The past isn't past when it still shapes your present, and most of it is invisible. You don't notice that you tolerate mistreatment until it becomes unbearable. You don't notice that you haven't exhaled fully in years. You don't notice that your life is being narrated by a voice that isn't even yours, until one day you collapse, not from weakness, but from carrying too much of what was never yours. The unseen consequence of childhood trauma is not just pain, it's distortion. You don't see people as they are. You see them through the lens of your unmet needs. You chase emotionally unavailable partners because they resemble the parent you could never reach. You people please because safety meant making others happy. You fear abandonment because your attachment was always a little bit fragile, a little bit conditional, and the world rewards this. At first, you're praised for being independent, for being selfless, for having no needs. But inside, you're starving for rest, for connection, for permission to just be. This is the double bind. The mask you wear to be loved makes real love impossible, because no one can love the real you if you never show them. And the scariest part, you don't even know where that real you is anymore. You buried them years ago, under achievements, under smiles, under silence, and now you're haunted by a subtle grief, a longing for someone you can't quite name. But it's you. It's the you that never got to exist. The you before the guilt, before the shame, before you learned to apologize for having needs. And the consequences don't end with you. This is generational. We don't just pass down eye color and surnames. We pass down beliefs, behaviors, wounds. You find yourself saying things you swore you'd never repeat. You react in ways that feel ancient, You feel like a child trapped in an adult body. And sometimes you act like it, not because you're immature, but because your inner child never got what they needed. And now they're still looking, in lovers, in friends, in strangers online. But no one else can reparent the parts of you you've abandoned. That's your work now. Because if you don't interrupt the pattern, you repeat it in your career, your friendships, your children. You either heal it or hand it forward. And you're beginning to see that, not with blame, but with clarity. You're not broken, you're echoing. And it's time to break the spell, because the longer you carry what your childhood taught you, the longer you live in someone else's fear. You were born with a voice, but you learned to whisper. You were born with needs, but you learned to hide them. You were born with boundaries, but you learned to trade them for crumbs. It's not your fault, but it is your inheritance. Until you decide otherwise. Rebellion doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like silence, like not explaining yourself, like not picking up the phone, like finally saying, "No, that's not mine to carry." That is the beginning of your liberation, not in a therapist's office, not in a self-help book, but in the quiet, private moment when you stop believing the voice that says you're hard to love, because that voice was never yours. It was planted, watered, reinforced, until you mistook it for truth. But now you're beginning to doubt it. You're starting to wonder, what if love doesn't require shrinking? What if safety doesn't require silence? What if worthiness isn't something you earn, but something you reclaim? This is the rebellion, returning to yourself, not the version of you that performs, not the one who keeps the peace at her own expense, not the one who turns herself into a mirror for other people's approval, but the real one, the wild one, the angry one, the honest one, the one who stopped showing up when survival became more important than truth. You won't find her in your perfection. You'll find her in your mess, in the part of you that's tired of pretending, tired of being okay just to make others comfortable. Freedom starts when you say it, "I'm not okay," and mean it, and stop apologizing for it, because healing isn't linear. It's a spiral. Some days, you'll feel like you've regressed. Others, like you've broken through. But each time you listen to the part of you that never got hurt, you're rewiring everything. This is not about fixing yourself. It's about finally meeting yourself without flinching. You don't need to become someone new. You need to unlearn who you had to be. That means boundaries, not walls, but sacred lines that say, "This is where I end, and that's where you begin." That means rest, not laziness, but recovery from years of emotional labor you never got paid for. That means anger, not cruelty, but sacred rage that says, "What happened to me was not okay." That means grief. Grief for what you lost. Grief for who you could have been. Grief for all the times you made yourself smaller to be acceptable. You can't skip this part. The rebellion is not about becoming powerful to prove them wrong. It's about becoming whole so you can stop living in reaction to a past that didn't deserve to define you. You will feel guilt at first. That's the residue of your programming. You were trained to prioritize others, to feel bad for having needs, to believe that choosing yourself was selfish. But guilt is not proof that you're wrong. It's proof that you're healing, that you're touching the edges of your conditioning and daring to cross it. And no, the people around you may not clap. They may call it a phase. They may sheen your boundaries. They may weaponize your past. But this is not for them. This is for the child in you who waited far too long for rescue. You are the rescue now, the adult you needed, the voice that says, "I believe you. I'm not leaving you. I see your pain, and it matters." That voice changes everything, because when you validate yourself, you stop begging others to do it. You stop giving away your power to people who wouldn't know what to do with it anyway. The rebellion is not loud. It's sacred. It's a quiet return to sovereignty. It's the moment you realize you don't need to be chosen. You need to choose yourself, not once, but again and again and again until it's no longer a rebellion. It's just who you are. You were never broken. You were just responding intelligently, desperately, courageously, to a world that didn't always know how to love you. You didn't become a perfectionist because you were born with something to prove. You became a perfectionist because praise felt like oxygen, and without it, you were invisible. You didn't become a people pleaser because you lacked a backbone. You did it because conflict meant danger, disapproval meant rejection, and rejection, to a child, feels like death. You didn't become numb because you lacked emotion. You became numb because feeling was a luxury you couldn't afford, because every time you felt too deeply, someone told you to quiet down, toughen up, be less dramatic. And so, you buried it. Your tears, your rage, your wonder. You buried your essence in the name of survival. And now, here you are, digging it back up, not to become someone new, but to remember who you were before the world taught you to be afraid of yourself. This is the ultimate truth. Healing isn't becoming better. It's becoming real. It's letting go of the identities that kept you safe, so you can finally become the one that sets you free. You are not your trauma. You are the awareness holding it, the soul observing it, the presence walking through it. You are not your pain. You are the one who endured it, the one who still got up, the one who, even now, is seeking light. And that is sacred. The fact that you're here, reading this, listening to this, means something inside you has survived the conditioning. That spark, that ache for truth, that whisper that says, there must be more. That's your original self, still intact, still burning, still yours. It's the part of you that knows, deep down, you were never too much. You were never too emotional, too needy, too soft. You were just in an environment that didn't know what to do with your wholeness. But now you do. You know what it looks like to rest without guilt, to say no without a 3-paragraph explanation, to walk away from people who confuse love with control, to stop begging to be seen, and instead start seeing yourself. Because the deepest wound was never that they didn't love you. It's that you stopped loving yourself in order to keep them close. But the greatest healing, it's when you return to yourself without shame, without explanation, without delay. This is your rebirth, not as a product of your past, but as the author of your present. You get to choose now what to carry, what to release, what to believe. You get to decide which voices stay in your head and which ones get evicted. You get to choose softness over survival, peace over performance, wholeness over pretending. And no, it's not easy. There will be days you slip, days you miss the familiar pain, days you forget you're free. But the truth won't leave you alone anymore. Not now, not after this awakening. Because once you've seen the strings, you can't go back to being the puppet. Once you've heard your own voice, you stop settling for echoes. So, here's the final truth. You may not have been able to choose your childhood, but you can choose your healing. You can choose your return. You can choose yourself over and over and over again. And that choice, that's where your power lives. Not in revenge, not in perfection, not in pretending it never happened, but in waking up every day, looking your inner child in the eyes, and whispering, we're safe now, you can breathe, I've got you. That's how the past stops winning. That's how you come home.